Welcome to our live hangout on the amendments to the India-Mauritius DTAA yesterday. We are calling it historic, path-breaking DTAA protocol that was signed yesterday out of the blue. For someone like me who's been following tax as a journalist for over 10 years, over 12 years now, in fact, this is something that we've been hearing for more than a decade, almost since the day I joined journalism. We've been hearing there is going to be an amendment. Yes, we are talking, we've made progress. Well, this came completely out of the blue. We did report last year first that they are very close to signing off on the amendments, that there will be a LOB clause. But again, for the last 6 months or so, things had gone a little cold. We didn't hear much, and then we see yesterday a press release by the government saying that essentially India and Mauritius have amended their DTA, and what India has been asking for a long, long time, to put an end to double non-taxation, to get a right to tax capital gains, that Mauritius has finally succeeded. Wow, that's a big giveaway by Mauritius. Of course, there is also a LOB clause. There is also a rider. There is smooth. There are some sort of good news also mixed with the big, not negative, but somewhat like a little bit better Mauritius. There is a little bit of a sweetener that there will be grandfathering. This will not have retrospective effect, which means the investments that have been made in the past probably will not get affected. How will the LOB clause affect the Singapore treaty? Is the Mauritius route essentially dead? As Rakesh is the big daddy of Indian investments, the Warren Buffett of India. Rakesh said that this will be forgotten tomorrow. It won't have an impact. We have so many views. On the other hand, you have Solicitor General, the former Solicitor General Mohan Parasaran saying that when India is attracting investments, the last thing you wanted was to disturb the India-Mauritius treaty. So you have multiple views. Very surprisingly, the tax world has welcomed the DTAA changes. And to talk about that, we have Mukesh Bhutani of BMR Legal and PVS Srinivasan Corporate Tax Advisor and former tax head of Wipro. At 6 p.m. we'll be joined by Dinesh Kanawar of Deloitte. I'll start straight with Mukesh Bhai. Mukesh Bhai, I know you must have spoken to your clients today, the FII clients. What did you tell them?
Well, I think in the first place, this change, has come about, which was not totally unanticipated, because as you know, the official position of both the governments has been that the treaty is under negotiation. I think the only debatable point in my view was that in what shape, in what form will we see the limitation of benefits clause. As you rightly pointed out, the limitation of benefits clause is again something which in my view is the standard or that has been laid down. And I think what came as a pleasant surprise is the grandfathering provision that we provided, and the concessional rate of 50% of the normal tax applicable for a 2-year period. And clearly, to me, it seems that what was on the top mind of the policy makers was, any kind of change which should not have a negative or an adverse impact on market sentiment, which I think they have largely been able to achieve. I also feel that this change was becoming more and more reality over a period of time, whether it's got to do with India's commitment to champion various causes as a part of the BEPS recommendation, particularly on misuse of treaties, or it's got to do with our own domestic bar legislation, which is staring at us within few months from now. So I think this change was imminent. I think if the government had done it late in the year, it would have come as a as having done it a period when very little time would have been given to the industry. So in a way, it is good that they have come out at the start of the financial year. So no surprises. We can deal with the Singapore treaty question at a later stage, but a quick reaction from me is that the Singapore treaty, to the extent benefits were available under the Mauritius treaty, will not survive. And I think what would be interesting now to see is Singapore going to renegotiate its treaty with India to provide for a similar farming provision, and the 50% concessional rate which has been provided as an intermediate arrangement between 2017 and 2019. So I think that's what it seems will come out. I would not be surprised if Singapore puts forth a proposition to give a similar treatment and have an amendment or a protocol. I also feel that from the Indian side, they should not look at it negatively, because I think the future of tax India for that are in any of the G20 nation, all about no tax arbitrage being available. So if they tax arbitrage that's available, which I don't think should be the intent in my view of the policymakers, but it will all depend on how Singapore moves with a proposition to amend its treaty with India on par with the Mauritius.
Yeah. Mukesh bhai, very quickly before I move to PVS, could you also tell us what was the reaction of your clients? Are they spooked or have they taken it in their stride?
I think they've taken it in their stride. Let me just look. You basically have two kinds of investors. One are the long-term investors, and second are the short-term investors, particularly the FPIs. Insofar as the long-term investors are concerned, I think this change is neutral to them, because they have made an investment in the past and now the grandfathering provision. Insofar as new investors are concerned, now they will have to make the investment decisions if they make after April 1, 2017, keeping in mind the new regulation. Insofar as the FPIs are concerned, that's an interesting one. On one hand, the FPIs have been kind of looking out for certainty in India's tax regime, particularly with respect to availability of benefits under the India-Mauritius treaty, because they compute their NAVs virtually on a day-to-day basis, and if Indian tax authorities assess any income on them on the pretext that they will deny the Mauritius treaty, then the FPIs are out of pocket to that extent. So my view, I look at it positively. Few clients that I have spoken to have been very positive about it, and I also feel that you need to look at these decisions from a long-term standpoint. If India is able to FDI or FPI investments, not just on based on friendly tax regime, but also on a certain tax regime, then it will augur well. Rupee will strengthen, and the overall economy will benefit. And these costs that we are talking about by way of incremental cost on capital gains would not really matter, because I don't think investors really mind paying taxes. What investors mind the most is the uncertainty surrounding the tax system, and I think that this singular move by the government, in my view, lends a lot of clarity and certainty, because even today, sans this circular, you really don't know whether a particular investor or an FPI will be allowed the tax benefit or not under the Mauritius Treaty. I think this kind of puts to rest that kind of uncertainty, in my view.
Yeah. PVS, sir?
Yep.
You agree with Mukesh?
I agree. In fact, I would like to possibly make some differential points, not as a disagreement, but a different way of looking at things. If you look at the FIIs, I think they are more protected than single investment companies where they come in through Mauritius, for the only reason that FIIs may meet the test of main purpose test as well as the bona fide business test, because they may have a frequency of activity which may be a little regular. But if you've got a single investment coming through Mauritius, I do not know how these two tests may be met. So what may be affected is FDI, what may not be affected is FII. So we may have to look at whether you want to encourage FII or you want to encourage FDI. And that's the differentiation I thought I should bring in from an investment act.
PVS, but on the structuring part itself, you have, since you represented an Indian MNC for so long, I wonder, we know that a lot of Indian MNCs do have structures in Mauritius. Promoters have structures in Mauritius, not necessarily the company that you represented, but that's quite well known. How does that get impacted? Will all of them now start slowly unwinding those structures. Of course, since we have grandfathering, the past investments will not be affected. But will those structures, be unwinded now?
No, I don't want to look at it. I think I will agree with Mr. Mukesh saying that a certainty is better than an uncertainty, and a tax cost which is known will be a better investment proposal than a tax cost which is unknown. And litigation avoided is a better investment than where litigation is inevitable at some point in time. With GAR in place, BEPS in place, treaty abuses and other things coming into place, it wouldn't have been very easy to have the Mauritius treaty going on for long. So it is very timely that the treaty has been amended. And just about the time when everything comes into force, you have got a LOB clause which will possibly protect the treaty abuse in a manner which is known to everybody rather than which is unknown to everybody.
Yeah,
So I think
you actually preempted my next question on the LOB clause. You want to carry on, and then I'll ask about the LOB.
yeah, so the LOB clause brings some amount of certainty, not a complete certainty. The differential one is whether FII versus FDI, the point I tried to make, a single investment, possibly even after you satisfy the conditions of expenditure, still whether it will qualify for the main purpose test and the bona fide business purpose test, I'm not sure whether that would be qualified. I would like to possibly hear Mr. Mukesh on that. Because finally, if India is looking for FDI, I do not know whether these two tests would be met when somebody channelizes his money through Mauritius instead of coming directly into India.
Mukesh bhai, for the benefit of our readers, I'm sure who must have gone through this press release a dozen times, but still, just to refresh everyone's memory, this is what the LOB clause says as per the press release. The benefit of 50% reduction in tax rate during transition period from 1st April 2017 to 31st March 2019 shall be subject to a LOB article whereby a resident of Mauritius, including a shell/conduit company, will not be entitled to benefits of 50% reduction in tax rate if it fails the main purpose test and bona fide business test. A resident is deemed to be a shell/conduit company if its total expenditure on operations in Mauritius is less than 27 lakh rupees, that is 15 lakh Mauritius rupees, in the immediately preceding 12 months. Too subjective, talking of in-purpose test, bona fide business test, does it make it a bit subjective?
I don't think it makes this whole debate subjective for the following reasons. Number one, you need to give a context to the manner in which both these conditions have been laid out. So let me just read it out again. It says the allegation of benefits clause essentially seeks to impose three forms of restrictions, if I may use that word. Number one, the Mauritius company should meet the main purpose test, including a shell or a conduit company. Second is the Mauritius company should meet the bona fide business purpose test. And then in order for you to demonstrate that you are not a shell or a conduit company, it has provided a threshold for incurring total expenditure with the limits that you just set out. So you need to read all of these three restrictions together rather than in an isolated manner. Now, let me just, before I just try and analyze this, make one more important point. Because India has had the benefit of judgments such as Azadi Bachao Andolan or Vodafone, you cannot lose sight of the law that has been laid down in those judgments. So let's take Vodafone judgment, where the court had an opportunity to examine the correctness of the Azadi Bachao Andolan. Even in Vodafone judgment, the court was very clear that if a treaty structure is being used for misuse or for tax evasion purposes, those structures don't apply. So even as of today, without the amendment to the Mauritius Treaty, you cannot kind of claim a treaty benefit for something which is a mere shell. You need to demonstrate the substance. Now that substance test has come in the form of in the form of the limitation of benefits clause, one which talks about the main purpose test, and second it talks about the bona fide business test, coupled with the restrictions that have been laid down that for a company not to be regarded as a shell or a conduit, it should incur X amount of expenditure. So I think you will have to read down these restrictions along with the law that has been laid down by the Supreme Court in Vodafone's case.
Mukesh bhai, I'll just read you, the reason I asked this question. You had a good friend, TP Uswal, telling us, however, what constitutes a bona fide business and constitute company is a $1 million question on which clarity is required. But it is now clear that substance of a transaction will be the key. However, I'm confident that when the government goes to election in 2019, the markets will crash and there will be a correction on this. So,
Sorry, Arun, your voice is cracking. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I just read out a comment from TP Oswal. He says, what constitutes a bona fide business and conduit company is a $1 million question on which
Correct.
clarity is required. But it is now clear that substance of the transaction will be key.
Absolutely, and I also feel that it will be too premature on part of Indian policymaker to be able to sit down and define the substance test, because at the end of the day, we still need to see the final print of what our GAR regulations look like. We also need to see the final outcome of Action Point 50, which is a multilateral agreement. So whereas countries are free to go and define the substance test and the business purpose test, but there has to be some degree of final guidance that needs to be available, particularly to the G20 countries, because their domestic laws now will have to align with what the guidance is coming in the multilateral agreement.
Previous, is there some confusion regarding the grandfathering clause as well, or do you think that reads quite well and
I would have got confused if I read only the grandfathering clause as is, but seeing the last line, there's an assurance that the grandfathering is complete for investments made prior to 1/4/2017. So I think if you read the last line, there's an assurance in the last line saying that it's a complete grandfathering, not a limited grandfathering for the purposes of investments made prior to 1st April 2017. There's a partial tax effect for investments made thereafter for 2 years. Then the regime opens completely that it will be liable to tax for all investments made after 1st April 2017. It will be liable to tax after 2 years, that is after 19. So I don't see it as a limited grandfathering. I see it as a unlimited grandfathering as far as investments made up to 1st April 2017.
Okay. Mukesh, you had another interesting comment this time from Vipul Javeri to say that now Singapore as a destination will be less attractive. I'll just read out the comment to you. I think quite an interesting comment because a lot of people will now be, weighing Singapore and Mauritius. This also means that Singapore becomes a less attractive destination for investment into India because the capital gains tax exemption under Singapore Treaty may also automatically end. So, essentially, what we're saying, Mukesh bhai, is that okay, now the Mauritius protocol, that's a done deal. Now we will be probably doing a lot of hair scratching and hair splitting over the next 12 to 24 months to see how Singapore Treaty reads, see whether there will be some sort of arbitrage. But really, the government has tied its hands. It cannot give Singapore in the treaty negotiations any more favorable treatment than what it has given Mauritius. Can they, Mukesh bhai?
Well, it's well within the realm of the government to give it, but just to answer, to the point that Vipul is making, I agree with him that if today you read the Singapore Treaty along with the proposed protocol to the Mauritius Treaty, Singapore is disadvantaged from an investor standpoint. But I don't think that it will end over here. In my view, if the government sticks to its larger philosophy that we will not allow any tax arbitrage, then on the principle of level playing, it will not be left with any option but to offer the same benefit to Singapore. Now the question is whether India wants to be benevolent and extend its hand to Singapore with India, claiming that the entire benefit that was available to Singapore is now completely done away as a result of protocol that it proposes to sign with Mauritius. So suddenly we see a situation where Singapore, which was emerging as a credible alternative for routing investments, has now become less attractive if you look at the protocol. But then I don't think that Singapore is going to kind of remain silent. Singapore will push the envelope and convince India that a new agreement, a new protocol rather, a fresh protocol should be signed to bring it on par with Mauritius.
Mukesh and PV, both of you, this question. The Revenue Secretary has been quoted in the press today as saying that GAR provisions will override the tax treaty provisions. In some ways, if what he says holds, then it does mean that the Mauritius protocol was just it was a formality, wasn't it? If GAR is going to override the tax treaty provisions, that's one. And B, is that an ominous signal?
No, I personally feel that once you have a LOB clause, and the LOB clause is also an avoidance mechanism essentially. If you have met the LOB, we still have to test the law whether GAR would apply or LOB would apply. I would personally at this point in time think that once you have a LOB and the LOB is met, it would possibly judicially interpreted that the GAR would not apply because the treaty would override in any case, and it's not that the LOB is not there. So I would say in the as a consequence of the LOB.
Saying that SAR overrides GAR.
No, a little more than that. I am saying treaty overrides the local domestic law. That's the first principle.
Sure.
Number two, the treaty also has a LOB, and you cannot ignore the LOB. Having applied the LOB and satisfied the LOB, whether you will have one more cap through GAR, and that is the question we are trying to answer. In my view, it will limit itself to LOB and it will not travel beyond that to GAR.
Mukesh, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah. So I entirely agree with PVS, and I would like to supplement that by saying that first you need to just look at the timing of this protocol. India is doing it in anticipation of its GAR regulation and in anticipation of BEPS action point. India's argument towards Mauritius for the last 8 years has been, we are not against the nil cap gains exemption, we are against stateless income, a term that is very often used within the OECD in the BEPS project. So what is India doing? Actually, India is preempting proposition which is coming out of the BEPS recommendation. So a LOB is akin to a inbuilt GAR provision in the treaty, and LOB is supposed to be preventing the misuse of treaty, and that's the reason the main business purpose test and conduit and shell companies are used. Now you cannot impose a domestic GAR on a treaty, because if you try and impose a domestic GAR on a treaty, it will out the purpose of the treaty, besides the fact that you will see a bizarre situation of domestic law overriding the treaty law, particularly since all the words that are now being incorporated in the new treaties, insofar as the LOB clause is concerned, are aligned to the OECD recommendations. So if you have an LOB and the tax authorities try and use the GAR provisions to go beyond the LOB, I think it will lose out on the very purpose of the treaty. That's my first point. The second point is that if you go back into the 2013 draft guidance that was given, and in the FAQ there was a specific example of Mauritius. It was incorporated only because at that point in time India-Mauritius treaty did not have a limitation of benefits. Now with the limitation of benefit clause, this should not be covered by GAR. Now the government may in its wisdom do whatever it has to do But I think what is more important is an international principle that if you have an LOB, you cannot have a GAR going beyond the LOB.
Yeah, Mukesh, on that, maybe you said this yesterday on the BEPS point, and a few minutes later we had a quote from a senior finance ministry official who was involved in these negotiations. He spoke to us on the condition of anonymity, and this is what he had to say. And I would like you all to pick some tea leaves from this. The senior finance ministry official said, "This is a long-standing issue that has now been addressed. It is in line with the BEPS recommendation to put an end to double non-taxation. It will provide a level playing field to everybody."
Correct. Exactly. I mean, I don't have to add anything. So I think I use the word stateless income, and a different term is being used by the Ministry of Finance official. But I don't think that anywhere in what has been stated by this official, he now on.
Perfect. Previous, sir?
Yeah, I would say a point I thought I will mention during our discussion today is there are certain investments from US which come into India, and these investments were being routed through Mauritius to avoid double taxation, if I may say, because the Mauritius level there was no taxation, and at the US level there was a taxation, and the India-US treaty does not permit granting of foreign tax credit on sourcing principle, which is at variance compared to the Indian sourcing principle. So therefore, you may find some US investors, by having a tax at Mauritius on account of the India-Mauritius protocol now, they may be visited with double taxation, one taxation at the Indian level and another taxation at the US level. So actually the investments from the US may be impacted, is my understanding at this point in time.
I thought that the facts of this case seem to be a little akin to the Aditya Birla Nuvo case, which actually went in favor of the revenue in Bombay High Court previously, because the investments there too were routed through US, through Mauritius. US investments are routed through.
No, that's why I'm saying there Indian courts holding that it is not liable to tax was yielding into one result, that it will be liable to tax only in the US, because finally we have to see where the destination of all these investments will go. If the destination is finally the US and Mauritius is only an interim destination, then the investor from the US would suffer one tax in the US, he would suffer another tax in India, and the tax suffered in India will not be available for set off in the US.
Yeah, cool. Mukesh bhai, have you been able to talk to any of the Mauritius-based funds, and what has been the reaction in Mauritius? Have they also taken it equally positively as we have?
Well, I haven't heard anything adverse as such, but look, at the end of the day, the objective of the fund manager is to be able to maximize return to its investors. So, purely from a medium to long-term point of view, they will need to factor in these costs as well. I mean, nobody is happy paying this, because particularly the fund managers, because they want to maximize return to their investors. So to that extent, they feel that from an expectation viewpoint, the nil capital gains regime should have continued without any restrictions. But I think they're also driven by realism, because it's not come as a root shock to any of the investors that I have spoken to. And I think they all say that at least it lends clarity, and that is concerned.
Last question to both of you. We have still have 12 months to go. From the time probably the grandfathering clause, comes into effect. Any advice for the government, since you are going to have BEPS recommendations coming into force very soon? You have the Mauritius protocol which will kick in. You have the GAR provisions kicking in next year. 2017 looks like a blockbuster year for tax professionals and tax consultants. Okay.
Well, I think that we should settle the debate insofar as the Singapore Treaty is concerned. I think this tax arbitrage that's available in government will going if it is Singapore, to be recipient of capital in the next several decades to come. There are other issues as well, particularly with respect to FPIs, on capital gains arising on other forms of securities such as convertible debentures, futures and options, uh, a clarity on whether they should be, they would be liable to tax or not. So I think these are some of the things that are crossing my mind, and I think also the government will do well by clarifying that. Though I know previous you did mention that the grandfathering is unconditional, and that the principles laid down by the Supreme Court will continue to apply, because in my view that's a further assurance to investors that there is going to be no change in mind, though the grandfathering provisions are of such a nature where both Mauritius and India are a party to it, and India cannot unilaterally do anything about it. But I think if you want to really push the rule of law, uh, it should say that this has been a subject matter of debate in India, which was debated at least in two judgments of the Supreme Court, and the law laid down by the Supreme Court will stand, so that at least it doesn't leave any doubt in the minds of tax inspectors at the time of assessment, and all the time and energies that get devoted to unnecessary controversies in our country at least are buried with this landmark move that the government has made.
Yeah, previous the final word.
It's a landmark move. I readily agree. What I would like to possibly see is that operational expenditure thresholds are at variance between the two treaties. One is referring to 1 year period, the other one is referring to 2 year period. There's a higher limit and the lower limit. And imagine that if I've invested in unlisted shares, which has to be held for 3 years, whether you have to look at the previous year or 2 years, and the expenditure has to be accordingly incurred to qualify for the LOB, I think that also makes some amount of difference as to where the investments could be better off.
Thank you. On that hair-splitting note, we end this hangout. We'll be back in 30 minutes with Dinesh Kanavar, Gautam Doshi, and Vipul Zaveri to carry this discussion forward. Thanks so much, Mukesh Bhai and PBS, for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank
you. Bye-bye.